So this morning, I'm going to talk about how enabling self-service, how automating leads to innovation. And this is meant to be a non-technical session in that it's not about digging into the weeds, but more about the concept of why. However, if you have questions on any of the scope, whether it be functional or anywhere in between, I'm happy to take a stab at it. So I think all of us have come to realize that all business is digital at this point. And what I mean by that is two things. One, when you talk about businesses as a whole, they are really, really integrated with technology. There are very few businesses that operate on the manila folder principle anymore. Many of them use email, use telephones, and these have become kind of the basic tools of technology. And then it's just gone further than that with the advent of the web and e-commerce, and even further, most things are embedded and operated in technology. I did have a little bit of embarrassing experience with one of my children recently where they pulled out an old phone book and I had to think for a moment on what do we do with that, So there's been a lot of movement from the days of, looking things up in a book to just, asking Siri to give you the number and there it goes. So that's one side of the coin. The other side is that as a group, the human race isn't full of patience. I'm saying that as a generality. And so people really prefer to be able to work in real time, in the way they want, when they want. And that drive has been motivating kind of a whole different go-to-market and go-to-employee sort of paradigm for quite some time now, actually. It's been coming over a number of different decades. It's just only recently in the last 2 to 3 years, it's really kind of hit the rocket booster side of acceleration. And so this, if you watch and you read Gartner, you'll notice that every year they struggle with how to put into words the current state of kind of the ethos of business and what's going on. And so now they're talking about digital business is new business models or designs that blur the digital and physical world so that regardless of where you are and what device or whether you're in person you're working with, you can transact business in all sorts of different ways. So when you talk about that and you map it to this term, or digital transformation, which, digital transformation, fortunately or unfortunately, is like many terms that are created to try to harness a feeling and a trend that's going on. It has different meanings depending on who you're talking to. There are as many formulas for digital transformation as there are people making formulas. To simplify it, I'm just talking about one that's 3 steps. Modernizing, automating, and innovating. So if we just take that at a high level for a moment. Modernizing is about looking at how you operate today, the technology that you operate today, some of the processes that you operate today, and understanding in that those things have been aligned based on what was possible to do. And so maybe those assumptions aren't true anymore. One of the examples that I have of that in my own life is that I work with many different clients, and I have for a lot of time. One of them had a very simple goal. They just wanted to ramp up their sales. I think that's a goal that you see all over the place. A lot of people are saying, I want to find and accelerate sales. What was holding them back, though, was not the sales force. The sales force was getting out there, trying new things, positioning new products. And what was actually really holding them back is they had a system where when a sale closed, it had to be entered into a system. And that system took about 65 seconds to commit the order. And the problem was that if you triple sales, there was simply not enough time in the day to get all the sales in. So what was happening is they were backlogging on basically the paper side of, how fast they could transact and put things into their automation systems. And the simple solve for them was modernizing the equipment that was running on, modernizing how that database that was taking so long worked. That solve probably took less than 2 days to get done in total, but it got the 65 seconds down to 10, and it raised the glass ceiling on how fast sales and what they were doing in their engagement with customer could go. And that's really an modernized kind of thing, not an automation kind of thing. They simply made what was more flexible and faster. When we talk about automation, automation is a big term. It has a lot of stuff under it. Self-service, engagement, those are all things that fit under automation, because you're looking at how to remove friction from a cycle or a process, which would include things like having a self-service portal, the ability to introduce the new ideas, decide which ones are good and which ones are bad, and either fail fast or scale and succeed. And then focusing the right resources on the right things within the organization and business. Those are all amazing. The outcomes that come from work around automation bring dividends that you can't even imagine until you do it yourself. Innovation, that last part, is where you're really getting serious about looking at how you engage your customers, how you find your customers, how you create better relationships with your customers, and then really the same thing with your employees. How do you engage them? How do you harness passion, take great ideas, and focus everybody on a single target to be able to actually really create business outcomes? In the doing of that, you're going to almost always optimize your operations. You're going to be taking a look at how you do things and the new ideas to do things differently. And ultimately, what you're looking for is to get a better alignment of what you produce as a business or organization to what the market and your customers need. And so transforming that and moving into the future is sort of the goal of the whole process. I will also add that when you take the word digital in, you're also taking the four walls out. So if you are a retail concern or a local organization, sometimes when you're doing your transformation, you're thinking about how you can do good or achieve your core mission with geography not applicable. So it is absolutely abundantly clear that there are very few organizations where people walk around saying, I'm bored. It doesn't really happen like that. In fact, what generally happens is that people are either adverse to change or they're just really busy. And so you get a lot of pushback about who has time to innovate or to have new ideas. Some people can even be a little resentful of having meetings to even talk about new ideas. The truth is of this pandemic time is that's probably gotten even worse. People are having to learn to operate and work in all new ways, and in some cases with less people, or they're going through abundant growth, and the same thing is happening, only the less people is in proportion to the new business. And when you look at kind of the historic thinking of the 80-20 rule, and let me define the 80-20 rule because there's more than one of them running around out here. 80% of the time, you're trying to keep the lights on and doing things they've always been done. 20% of the time, you're looking at new ways and innovations. A lot of people are saying that it's more like 90-10 or 95-5 right now. And so how do you address that? How do you even make room to change? So automation in all of its different forms is really all about taking out the stuff that people don't have to do. And you heard, I think, in the keynote about some of the newer innovations in technology and the tool sets available in terms of robotics and AI. They're all aimed around how do you take out repetitive tasks? How do you focus and harness the skills of people to do the work that needs to be done, that is the true new work, the true innovation work? And ultimately, how do you put time back into your employees' week? Because if they don't have time back, they can't allocate even more. So I'm often asked, okay, those are really amazing sentences, and I totally understand how this would be great. Where do I start? Like, where do you, if you haven't started at all right now, where do you start? And so I want to contrast the fact that where you start for your employees and where you start for your customers are slightly different, but they do have commonalities. So where you start with your employees is first, you need to get on a common definition of terms, and you need to understand all of the variables at play in a conversation about automation and digital transformation. We often recommend to our clients and partners that they read a book called The Phoenix Project. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. It is a little like an IT soap opera. And what's so great about that is whether you are technical or not technical, in reading this relatively short book, you're going to get sort of the political forces, the business forces, the customer forces, the internal forces. You're going to get to see all of that play out. And you're also going to get a lesson in some of the terminology that people are using today to measure change in companies. And so an example might be for you, if you are not familiar with the concept of 10 changes a day, which is how sort of born in the cloud and agile transformed companies at a baseline kind of measure their ability to deliver simple, predictable changes that make their product better every single day. That used to be considered absurd, by the way, but that was undoable. And once you kind of commit to the baseline goal, you start working on how to solve that problem, and you find that the impossible actually is very possible. To give you a different example that maybe is a little more crystal, if you think about fast food restaurants, fast food didn't really exist, before the 50s, basically. And it was a technology problem. How do we optimize a process to be able to produce food that people will want to eat and do it in a predictable fashion over and over again with the least amount of staff possible? Clearly, just from how many fast food restaurants we have running around these days, you can see that that was a problem that people took on and came to different solves on, but came up with this concept of delivering a predictable product and being able to scale it. So it's important for you to understand in your organization or business, what is that baseline goal you're trying to get to? So once you understand that, and once you understand that transformation is a cultural change as well as a process change, it's about getting people aligned. So the next thing you really need to do is you need to focus on listening and learning about what your employees currently have going on. Now, here's the problem with this. This is the hard part. If you go up and you ask the average person to tell you what is the thing that's hard about their job or what holds them up in the day, the problem is they will not give you the answer that you need, not because they're bad or trying to sabotage you in any way, but because it's really hard for a human to answer that question in a moment. They're influenced by factors such as making sure that they keep the authority people happy, so they want to answer in the way they think that person might want. They may not know. They may not think about their day like that. And so it actually works a lot better to ask people to walk you through, to let you sit with them in their cube and watch what's going on, to pick a part of the thing that they do and say, can you walk me through this for 10 minutes? And take in all of that data, all of those interviews and observations, so that you can look at and conduct some low budget, kind of under the radar experiments where you validate what would it look like if it was better? What would better mean? Is it faster? Is it different? And the reason you do this is, first of all, you never want to assume that your idea is really going to be right. It may look better to you, but it may miss a core element that you missed in the interviews. The other thing is having buy-in from lots of people on a change means the change has a much better chance of success. So this is an opportunity to create conversations. This is an opportunity to learn about how things are done and what could benefit from maturing a process or getting tools behind it. And it helps you identify where's the low-hanging fruit for automation to really deliver and self-service to really deliver. So if you go out there and somebody says, for this process, I now fill out a form and I wait 2 weeks for someone to come back with this, and then I can move forward to the next step. Those are all red flags of places where if there's a long wait, there's generally something that can be done about the long wait. And that's just to start scratching the surface. The other thing that I suggest is a lot of people feel very uncomfortable, particularly if the technology people bring up the subject. And the reason is, for a lot of people, technology is a foreign language. And so one of the things I've seen in multiple organizations that has gone a long way to building bridges and understanding is having tech days where you get people who have found tricks to do things better, faster, more wonderfully, and new things that have come out from IT, and you basically create a chain of seminars for the whole staff to be able to see, where they can come and sort of see it as peers and learn from it and improve from it. And sometimes that can be lower the barriers on being able to have some of these wider conversations. Pausing for just a second to see if anything hit the Q&A. So for customers, it's a little different. There's a lot of things in common, and there's a lot of things not in common. The hardest thing about figuring out how to empower a customer is that, unlike somebody who works in your organization, it's actually a lot harder to go out and ask them about it. The experience, what they like, what they don't. Most people turn to surveys, and a lot of customers don't do them. You do definitely want to try to get some data together about where you are now with your customers, whether that be NPS scores or some other happiness score or some other attribute that you're using. But the reason that you want to know where you are now is that what you're looking for is you're looking to see if there's a competitive expectation that can help you set your sights, but also it also helps you target who to go conduct casual conversations with. So you want both the happy and the unhappy. And, pre-pandemic, this could be a coffee or a lunch or a lot of other things. I have personally been on a number of these, sort of adventures where you're sitting down and having an informal conversation about, what makes it easier for them. What is their frustration, just in general, not necessarily even with you, in terms of finding solutions to the challenges that come up, and what are they doing, and where are they on their digital journey, and all of that kind of information. Because with that, it helps you to paint a picture of where you might be able to make changes. Now, again, in the same way that you would do it with internal staff, you definitely want to stay under the radar and be able to try a few things with some trusted customers within the organization and try to figure out if it makes it better or much better or a little better or not really better at all, so that you can get to the heart of what is the ask and what is the difference, and is it culture or process, technology. What's really interesting about digital transformation is that a lot of times it's not a technology thing. It's a process or cultural thing where you're putting in a new technology tool set to support the new, but you have to imagine in your mind first what it is you're trying to get done. So what do you do once you have all of this information? When you're doing a few trials, once you're trying to take an idea that looks like it's good and it's been tested and it still looks good, what do you do with that? So you're going to document the process that people are going through right now, the new process. You want to make sure that you have down what you're trying to accomplish and what the change is. And then you want to document the technical side, which, by the way, may not only come from you and may not match the process side. This is where the tool sets may deviate to get things done. So in the example I gave you earlier of a long wait, the technical process might be a bunch of artificial intelligence or just simple business process automation approvals happening in the background, which, for the person sitting in front of the computer or on the website or on the portal, they're not seeing any of that. They're just seeing the outcomes as they move along. You want to make sure that all the stakeholders around this know what's going on, that you know who they are, and understand that they may have other ideas, not just in whether or not they like what you've done, but they might have ideas to extend it even further. They may be aware of things in their own journeys that may add to this. So as this original idea, this low-hanging fruit, starts bubbling up and more people are looking at it, the goal is to get a groundswell that creates change. But you may find multiple other changes being suggested at the same time that solve similar problems or different problems and other challenges all over the place. And I would say that when that happens, it's a good thing, but you do need to remember to prioritize. You do not want, in the beginning of any kind of endeavor, 50 or 60 changes happening at once. It's really hard to ensure that you win, and you want wins, particularly in the early days, to build credibility, because you're trying to help people to accept change, which is the hardest thing for most humans to do. Also, I will say the whole goal here is to empower employees and customers. So if you build something that is housed in IT, only done by IT, and it becomes a technology-owned thing, ultimately, at the end of the day, you will overburden IT, and you haven't really achieved the mission of empowering people, of giving them the ability to achieve and try new things. So you want to make sure that you're enabling the user population to do better and to innovate on top of the innovation, not make them wait for someone else. So, okay, so we're talking about automation, we're talking about self-service, we're talking about a lot of things. So I'm often asked, we're talking about these technology tools, and there are millions of them, and they're like, but what are we really talking about? What are these tools? So I picked 4 very different ones just to talk about today, and there are quite a few out there. In many organizations, there are a few people running around who are really, really good at Microsoft Excel and Excel macros. They've actually risen to the point where IT can be actually kind of terrified of them, because they're programmers in their own right, kind of doing shadow IT to create automation in Excel spreadsheets. So when you apply that to infrastructure, business process, going beyond the realm of any one application like Excel, Ansible is a good tool, a good example of a tool that is kind of the modern day equivalent of that. In Ansible, you write what they call playbooks, which is really putting to code business processes and approval processes and doing steps in order automatically. And you then have the ability through a GUI to be able to put permissions around them and security around them and distribute them across organizations so that people can reuse. There's a really large community for Ansible out there, and so a lot of these things you might be trying to do, there's probably already a template for it. The library of community stuff got so big for Ansible, they started calling it the Galaxy. So that gives you some idea of the scale and scope of what's out there. And so if you're looking for an example of a personal tool that works for developers all the way up to just basic users, that is about how do I make the automation of steps and technology faster, Ansible could be a great tool. If you're trying to figure out how to bring everything together in a monolithic cloud or even a modern technology infrastructure, and you need all that data to come together, Boomi has been out there for quite some time and is a great tool, an example of a tool that's about removing silos and interconnecting things. And it's all about the business outcome. So I think the original case study with Boomi from decades ago was the 0-day start. So what is a 0-day start? You hire somebody new. You want it to be that when they come in on their first day and sit down at their desk, their computer, their cell phone, their training is up on the screen, onboarding is occurring, all of that stuff across all the organization has happened automatically. And that is the power of breaking down the silos of your data. You can also turn it a different way and use it to create, the data that you collect is actually one of the most valuable resources of a modern organization or company. And so Boomi, by breaking down those silos, gives you the ability to put all that data together and analyze it together and see what patterns and sort of gold coins in the pot of gold you can find within your organization today. How do you monetize your data? So conversely, completely different stuff. VMware vRealize is an example of a self-service technology. How do I create a portal that you log into as an employee, potentially even a customer, and it lists for me all the things that I can do, and I click on them and it happens. And that can be a developer community who's asking for resources to develop something new. That could be getting into certain applications. The goal here is that a single platform to create consistency in policy. That might include approval policy, security policy, economic policy, that doesn't have boundaries. So it works across what is now being called multi-cloud. So whether you're mixing private cloud and public cloud and hybrid cloud and on-prem and whatever you're trying to mix, the term multi-cloud is now the kind of the single yes, whatever that may be. And so we're looking at a platform here that is trying to manage across all of it. So self-service, security, policy management, deployment, wherever it may be, in the right way for the right thing, all in one kind of place. And that is a positioning for VMware as a company as well. But their vRealize platform is an example of a tool that helps you get it done. And under the covers, there's the automation engines and the business process engines that are doing the heavy lifting for all of that. What is important to the user, the customer, is that it looks simple. And then finally, I lumped them all together as public cloud because honestly, the title line was getting to be like 3 lines long if I put it out there. But if you understand that the public cloud at its most fundamental is a tool chest, it's a set of tools where all of these different tools were actually developed around specific business challenges that people were experiencing. And so the weaving of those tools together creates a platform that can create automation and self-service. You can develop new applications and scale them out. But what's interesting about it is that the self-service aspect of it is about people who want to build new things. It's basically like putting people in a sandbox and saying, here are the toys. Now you can assemble them in the right way to get to what you want. And as public cloud has evolved, they've started adding in the process and business approval sort of side of it so that security and policy management can come in and sort of surround it. So people have the freedom to create, but then there's still that security around it as well as time marches on. So again, these are not the only tools out there. I wanted to give you, a basis of category, if you will. If you're trying to enable individuals, if you're trying to interconnect data, if you're trying to manage and be able to take advantage of all the best that's out there from the public, the private, and everywhere in between. Or if you're just in the public cloud already and you're looking at how you can use your presence there to forward automation and self-service for your customers and your employees. Here's just a set of tools. I don't see any questions, so I'm going to keep going. So how do you know which tool to choose? Actually, this is really a tough one. And the reason this is a tough one is that there is a natural sort of process of trying new things and then growing from that experience and outgrowing the ways you did the first attempt. So if you don't know what I mean, sometimes when people try something new, they use something familiar. And so that makes them feel a little more comfortable to try something completely new, but they hit the boundaries of it. So, we're using a lot of Zoom these days, but we hit the boundaries of what Zoom is capable of, and then different platforms have to come in. How many different virtual conference platforms had to come into being because you couldn't do an exhibit hall in Zoom and things like that. So when you're choosing a tool, you're actually taking a little bit of a risk that the tool may be outgrown, whether relatively quickly or down the line. Sometimes that's okay. But in general, what we recommend is try for neutral tools that will work anywhere. That does help you later so that one decision doesn't block another. You also want something that is supported widely. So a brand new tool from a startup might be the most amazing piece of technology ever. I'm not saying it's not. I'm just saying that if you don't have a broad base of support there, frustration can occur when you're trying to develop with the tool. So you want to make sure that you have the support organization pulled together, because again, you don't want IT doing all this work. You want it to be okay for everyone to kind of leverage and harness these tools. And so great community will go a long way to make people feel less frustrated. You want to make sure that the tool doesn't need a lot of upkeep, doesn't need a lot of reinstallation, doesn't need a lot of extra overhead on it. If you're just adding work to upkeep the tool, you may be saving work in your daytime life, but you're just really transferring it. You're still building up debt in terms of hours, and you're not freeing hours, which is ultimately the whole point, right? To return hours to people. Tool needs to be simple to use and understand. If it can do the most amazing things ever, but you need a 14-week course on it and 3 programmers in the organization are the only ones who understand it, it is going to be a natural bottleneck. You can see this actually playing out some in the business intelligence and analytics kind of universe. There are just so many data scientists in the world right now, and a lot of people are trying to grow employees within their own organizations to be able to help bring that data out to the organization as a whole and to kind of monetize their information. If the tools are simple, then sometimes the simple stuff like getting a quick, Power BI report can be done by each individual, and you're not creating this natural bottleneck. Again, we're looking for self-service and automation here. So if we set the bar so high, then we haven't achieved that. Lastly, I've said this a couple of times, I can't emphasize this enough. In this day and age, if you're dealing with tool sets that only are usable by IT, that is not what it means to take your business digital. Everyone needs to be a participant in your new digital organization. So everyone needs to be able to use these tools. I'm not saying IT doesn't have a job, they do. And they have a very important one, and they need to focus their resources there. So I got a question, so it started bouncing. So if you're in the leadership team and you're trying to figure out how do you get started, the first thing that I suggest you do is twofold. One, you want to figure out who's going to do the work of focusing on this. It's great to have a bunch of organic sort of things happening across the organization, but you do want to make sure that from all levels, top down, there's buy-in here, that everybody agrees there should be change. If the people at the top of the organization are not bought into change, it becomes a real challenge to get the bottom of the organization and the people doing it day to day to kind of buy into change and start working towards it. But in general, leadership should be looking for the time killers. They should be looking for the innovation resources, the people excited about change within their organization. What's important to note is those people can be great ambassadors and cheerleaders, but you don't want to make them the people doing it all. All these ideas are going to come from people who are going to be passionate and really believe in them. And telling someone else your idea and asking them to run with it, no one's going to believe in your original idea more than you are. So it's important that leadership learn to embrace that all ideas are good until they've been tested and tried, and try to figure out where does that make you more competitive? How does that position you to a future vision? I would also add, if you haven't articulated a future vision, if you don't know where you're trying to go, and the organization doesn't know either, it's really, really hard to line up transformation behind it. So once you kind of have some of those resources pulled together and you kind of see where some of the low-hanging fruit is, and you've figured out who you want to be the best person to drive, not just the individual tests and initiatives, but overall, who's going to run with this idea of moving change, which really should be a group of leaders, because you really want lines of business kind of pulling all in the same direction. If you get stuck at that point and you don't know what to do, I will say that sometimes, and the reason there are a bunch of consulting firms running around digital transformation, sometimes the only way to get out of gridlock in your own organization is to have a consultant come in and help facilitate the conversation. They won't necessarily facilitate the doing, because that can be self-defeating, because if somebody else does all the work of making a change, you now rely on them instead of your own organization. But facilitating the conversation toward change can be a lot more productive when a third party is involved to kind of facilitate the conversations. And obviously, if you do need technical help, tools help, decision help, there are a number of organizations out, including Mavenspire, who are there to help you and kind of walk through this. This is not necessarily an easy thing. There are a lot of, and I hope I've given you today some places to start, some steps to take to kind of get on the bus and start rolling in the right direction. But it is very telling that over the last 5 years, only about 33% of organizations have really gotten an initiative off the ground and sort of sustained it. Now that is accelerating. The curve is definitely moving. And I think Daniel even said that we don't really have 2020 numbers, but there is sort of the feeling that 2020 even accelerated it more, just because of the nature of living and working in a pandemic time. But I will say that this is something that's a process that takes a lot of people, and it's all about people and culture and change. So if you can take the friction out of the day-to-day and give people more time, they will use that time to help drive your digital transformation. And I will pause for any questions. Marty, did I answer your question? Okay, well, I don't see any other questions coming in, so I can either return a little time for you. I will stay here for just a couple more minutes if you have a question. I am thrilled to answer it. I'm sorry that this format does restrict our ability to have conversations on the side, but you absolutely can reach out to me. I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm happy to help anyone get started. I know this stuff can seem a little scary, especially in the beginning, but I can tell you that if you start small and work forward, there's a ton of value and a ton of satisfaction when you start seeing it all work for you. We also have an exhibit booth in the virtual exhibit hall. You can stop by there for us too. Thanks, everyone.